My name is Joanne Cheng. I work for ThoughtBot out in Denver, Colorado, but I'm really happy to be here in Boston this weekend for Wicked Good Ruby. You might be wondering what's been playing for like the past couple minutes. These are all movies that have been made with processing. Everything you see here has been made with processing. Processing is a Java framework for creating visual and interactive programs. It was developed at MIT by Ben Fry and Casey Reyes, originally designed as a tool to teach beginners how to program. But it sort of took on a life of its own in the past couple of years. Artists discovered it and started using it as a creative medium, as seen here. All of these have been created by artists who have, these are all just works of art created by processing. As a web developer, I really like it. It's sort of an escape from my day-to-day job as a web developer, and I also really love the mission statement of processing. The project is designed to turn engineers and computer scientists to less gainful employment as artists and designers. But I'm here today to talk about Ruby processing, which is a really simple wrapper for the processing framework that allows a programmer to write processing sketches, which are processing programs, with Ruby. And I think Ruby processing is a fantastic way to be creative through code, and this type of creativity can help you in your day-to-day job. Once we install the Ruby processing gem, we get this command line tool called RP5. And this is going to help us run and manage and create our processing sketch. So I'm going to create a new sketch called bounce using the create command. And so in this example, I want to show you how easy it is to get started writing a processing sketch. And I'm going to show you how to write one that just makes a ball move all across a canvas. Think of like your DVD screen when it goes to sleep. You see that logo just bouncing all around. So after I create a new sketch, it gives me a file to work with, and I can just run this file as is using the run command. And so you see here in the left-hand corner is a blank processing sketch. There's nothing in it right now, but we can change that. So this is a blank processing sketch. It's just a skeleton to start creating. You can see that there's a new class that inherits from processing app, and then there's two methods in there. We're just going to focus on the setup method right now. So to change the size of this canvas, we can just call the size method and pass in a width and a height. And to see the changes we make, we have to stop the sketch and run it again, but we can call the watch command, which will watch for any changes in the bounce file and reload them as we make changes. So the size method and other methods I'm going to be referencing today can be looked up in this page, which is the reference guide for processing. You'll see that some of these method names are camel-cased. I'm going to call them in a more Ruby-friendly convention because Ruby processing lets me do that. I'm going to keep adjusting the size of this. Okay, oh dear, that's not good. That's not supposed to happen.
Bring it down to 50 pixels on that if you can.
Okay.
We're having some resolution issues earlier.
All right, that looks good. So now I'm going to change the background color of this sketch. And I'm just going to call the background method. I could either pass it in one number, which will change the grayscale value, or I could pass it in three numbers, which will change the red, green, and blue values of this sketch. But for now, I'm just going to make this a white background. Now I want to draw the circle that's just going to move around the canvas. And to draw a circle, I'm going to use the ellipse method. And I pass it in an x-coordinate, a y-coordinate, the width, and the height. And there's a circle, the tiny little circle. I can go adjust the height with that fourth parameter. And all these all these measurements are the diameter of the circle. And a note about coordinates in processing, the bigger the x value, the further right in the canvas it goes. And the bigger the y value, the further down in the canvas it goes. I'm just going to pull out these numbers into variables. And I'm going to do a little bit of adjusting just to make this a little more visible. It's a little too big. I want to make this still a little more visible, so I can change the stroke width of that circle to make it a little more bold by just calling the stroke width method before I draw the circle. And I could smooth out the lines by calling smooth, which will smooth out all the lines that we draw in this processing sketch. And I'm going to change the fill color of the circle. And fill works very similar to background. We could either pass it in one number or 3 numbers. Okay. Now I want to focus on animating, and we've been focusing on this setup method for a little while. So what happens on line 24, when this bounce class gets instantiated, the setup method gets called once, and then the draw method gets called over and over and over again as long as the sketch is running. So with that draw method, we can create frames for our animation. And I'm going to draw the same circle, but I'm going to change the x position and y position to create an animation effect. So so what's happening is all these circles are drawing on top of each other. So we need to clear out the background. And so that background method on line 7 can clear out the canvas as well as set the background color. And so we just call that before we draw anything or call anything else in the draw method. So now we need to create a boundary for this circle, so it doesn't, the x position and the y position don't get too big or too small. So this width method that I call on line 26, that just returns the width that I set up in line 6 in that size method. So another note about position, right now the circle's position is the center of the circle, so that's why part of the circle is getting cut off. So we just need to take in the radius, and we need to take the radius into consideration when we're creating this boundary. And okay, so that's working as it's supposed to. I want to add a little bit of user interaction and randomness to this sketch. I really like both those things. I think they're just both fun things to play with. And so the way user interactions work in processing is that there's these methods that you can define. Oops. there's these methods you can define in processing that will get called every time these user interactions happen. So in this example, every time the mouse button is clicked, the change of the color of the circle is going to change to a completely random color. So I'm clicking the mouse button. And that's it. So that was a really simple example of how to get started with Ruby processing. And it was really easy to get up and running quickly. I want to show you some other things I've done with processing and Ruby processing over the years that I think have sort of been completed. But before I do that, I want to talk about this video clip right here. This is Radiohead's House of Cards music video. And this was released in around 2008. Everything that you see here has been created with 3D motion capture data and processing. So processing was used to render all these points and create this effect. And this was the first time I discovered that one could create art with code. And I finally saw that intersection when I saw this video. And I thought that was amazing. It was a couple of years after I started programming, and it kind of motivated me to keep pushing and keep learning about programming so I can one day create some cool things. So some other things I've made with processing. This was one of my first side projects in processing. I'll just show you how it works, and hopefully nothing breaks. It's not supposed to happen. No. Okay. Okay. So that was a grid-based music player that I'd sort of I'd seen other people play around with, like a live hardware version, and then I sort of became obsessed with it and trying to create it in software. And with processing, it was really easy to create that because it was really easy to create the user interface and talk to the MIDI controller to do that. And then something more recent that I did. Okay. Well, can I make that full screen? Okay. So I lived in Philadelphia for a couple of years, and they released, the city of Philadelphia released an API to get bus locations in the city. And so I basically created a script to just collect bus locations every minute, and then I wanted to see what that looked like over the period of a day. And so I used processing for this. And I was really happy this is how I discovered Ruby processing, because it was I had a lot of JSON files, and I was kind of parsing through them, and it was a lot easier to handle JSON in Ruby than it is in Java, if some of you have worked with it before. And this is how I discovered how great Ruby processing was in terms of getting getting feedback immediately and being able to experiment with things. And I had a couple of other experimentations. I decided to play around with various visualizations, and then had a couple of versions of this processing sketch. This is a little slow. So this is what happens when you don't clear out the canvas after drawing lines in between points in the city. So it just sort of slowly appears. And you can see which bus paths in Philadelphia are traveled more often because they're brighter. It's not real time. This is a video, actually. So I collected it over a day, and then I just played around with the data for a bit.
And this could tell a city planner an area is underserved. The dark areas are definitely
Yes.
underserved and have fewer routes and things like that.
And then I created, I gave this same talk in, another conference in Berlin called Eurocamp. And the really unique thing about this conference was that people were coming in from all these different countries to one place to this conference. And it was a pretty small conference. But I decided to send out a little survey, ask people to fill out a Google form. And this is not working. Did it just freeze? I think
Did the computer freeze or just the display?
just the display. Should I just?
Yank it out.
Come on.
Oh, very good.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, you saw bits of it. So what was happening is I wanted to visualize like people coming into one point for this one conference, and it was a fun visualization to do. Mostly because I found a lot of weird errors when I was trying to figure out how to actually visualize that. So this was a horrible mistake, and this was even worse when I tried to add labels to the points. So it was some of the mistakes were a lot of fun to discover. So what's the point of all these small projects, and what's the point of why is Ruby processing such a great framework to play around with? I saw a lot of improvements in myself after digging into these Ruby processing projects, even though they were all just like little side projects and little side experiments. The number one thing was my fluency improved, and it wasn't just because I was writing more code. It was because the sort of responsive nature of writing processing projects, it encourages you to experiment more and to make a lot of mistakes and to try things out. And so I have this tendency, I used to have this tendency of just freezing up in front of the keyboard before I even wrote a line of code, because I would overthink things. And so processing and Ruby processing just helped me get rid of that habit. And because of that, my confidence improved. It was a huge thing a lot of us talk about imposter syndrome, and this was sort of a way for me to deal with it by just making a lot of mistakes and trying things out and making a lot of small projects like this. And I loved Ruby processing because it became a place for me to practice writing code. I am a web developer, as I mentioned before, and I really like I really like how processing, I don't have to think about so many moving parts like in web development. And so it became a great place for me to practice new things and try out new things and actually finish projects. If you're interested in getting started with Ruby processing, and I highly encourage you do, there's a couple of caveats to installing the Ruby processing gem that I have up in this link, this bit.ly link up there. And here are a bunch of credit. So all the videos that you saw in the beginning are referenced in the credits. So it's my information. I also want to thank Thoughtbot for sending me here to talk about this framework, and I hope I've encouraged you all to try something new with Ruby processing. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
Okay, so how did you go from a Ruby processing script to an MPEG file?
So the question was, how did I go from a Ruby processing script to an MPEG file? So processing has this method called saveframe. So every time the draw method is called, you can save a frame, and it just puts a image on your file system. So I just can use like FFmpeg to turn everything to a video. Yes?
Another basic question: is there a way to display this in a browser if I have real-time data and things? How portable is that canvas? For web development or for a...
It would actually It's probably possible. I mean, you can make anything is possible. It just depends on. Actually, it would probably depend on like any API limits that you have, or any limits that the API has itself. But yeah, it'd be possible.
I think there's a processing JavaScript.
Yes.
that you can also
hmm
How similar is this to processing.js?
Pretty similar. I think I'm actually not too familiar with processing.js. I mean, processing.js draws everything on a canvas in the browser, whereas this is Java Swing. So
In that one demo, you had sort of menus controls. Was that all done in processing?
it was. It's actually it's a processing library that I use to for menu items. But yeah, someone else built that. Huh? The question was, how did I make the menu controls? And that was with an external processing library. Yes?
How many lines of code do you find you typically need to be productive, or do you split it into a lot of different files most of the time?
Yes. So I like to split, in processing projects, I like to split out anything that's not drawing anything into just separate classes, and just sort of keep that separate from the drawing and the setup.
So you have any idea of lines of code or how big your programs are there?
Let's actually see. So the year camp project was 116. The Philadelphia bus one was about, I guess, around 200 with everything together. There's a couple of different files. Oh, thank you. Yes?
Is there any reason that you would use like Java processing versus Ruby processing?
So Ruby.
Limitations in Ruby processing?
The question was, would you rather use? Is there any reason why you would use Ruby or Java processing over Ruby processing? Mostly to stay up to date. So Ruby processing is still a little behind the processing project. So that would be, I guess, that's a disadvantage. Any other questions? No? Okay.